Welcome to my review of R-Type Final 2. And this is on the Xbox Series X, but it's also available on PC, PS4, and Switch. One thing I like about this game is that you can unlock about 50 different ships, I believe, but I believe some of them are not available now, so I was only able to unlock maybe 12 ships, something like that, in the time that I played, but I didn't do a lot of extra play time. I probably only have about maybe 10 hours on the game, something like that. I played through normal mode, and I'm going to post a link to the tutorial that I made for the game in the description, so check that out. And that'll go over all the strategies I used to beat the game. There's a lot of exploits. But I definitely had mixed feelings about this game because I probably would have beaten normal mode in about 5 to 7 hours. But it took me over 9 hours because I had 2 crashes that occurred on the final stage. And there's 3 different paths for the final stages, which is very cool. So there's basically 6 additional stages in the game, and some of them you may not see depending on which path you take. So there is a certain point in the game where you can pick a colored orb, and that will determine what path you go down. And each path contains 2 levels. So the 2 final stages you play are going to be determined by that path that you choose on that part of the game, which is something you could easily miss. So it's cool. Now, see, this first boss, extremely easy, obviously, but this first boss actually has a more advanced form. As you can see, part of it is frozen in ice. If you play on the hardest mode, you get to fight the full form of the boss. That's something I didn't realize about the game. So it seems that playing the game on the harder modes reveals more of the game. So, unfortunately, I didn't play much on the hardest mode because I had 2 game crashes on the final stages on normal. So that's the reason I say that the game took me around 9 hours to beat on normal. It probably would have been 5 to 7, but I had 2 back-to-back crashes, so I wasted a lot of hours having to replay and get back to where I was twice. I basically had that happen twice on the same day, so I stopped playing for that day. I went back a day or 2 later, and luckily the game didn't crash. It may have something to do with the quick resume feature or, leaving the game running for too long, so I suggest not taking long breaks when playing this game or shutting the system off, which is unfortunate. But if you're going to work on the hardest mode, it's not going to be too desirable because, you may spend 10, 15 hours getting to the end of the game with free play. Once you unlock free play, which is unlimited continues, and then you may have the game crash when you get to the end. Now, some bosses like this are extremely generic and just fucking tedious. I mean, you just pretty much just waiting around. I never beat this boss in time. I'm sure if you have more powerful weapons, you can take it out faster. But with the ships that you start with, it seems like you're unable to really take this boss out in any reasonable amount of time. So it usually just times out. And it's just very boring and tedious. You just hang out and, you try to avoid the plants that sprout out of the ground, basically, and just avoid the bullets. It is easy to mess up, and then, you will have to fight the bosses again. So it's kind of a pain in the ass. And of course, you want to make sure you have the right weapons for the right bosses equipped, which, your different ships have different weapons available depending on the color of the power-up you choose. So you want to experiment with different ships, different power-ups, to see what weapons work. I like that aspect of the game a lot. The experimentation is very cool. But the game has a lot of generic shit. I mean, some of the bosses are kind of generic. Now, some of them, like I said, seem to be better on the hardest setting, but the problem is if you want to work on the game on the hardest setting, like I said, you're going to spend a lot of time slowly crawling through the game checkpoint to checkpoint, since you start with no power-ups on the checkpoints initially, and you'll just have to crawl through the game, and then at the end you may have the game crash. Since there's no saves, you may have to start the entire game over again on the hardest setting. For that reason, I wanted to play through the hardest setting and make a tutorial on that, but I decided not to because I didn't want to waste my time. It feels like it doesn't really respect the player's time when the game crashes at the end with no way to save anything. I wouldn't want any kind of save anywhere feature or anything like that because that would be cheap. But what I would like is to be able to save, the last checkpoint I got to, so I can resume if the game crashes. If the power goes out, I can go back to the checkpoint I last got to. Of course, initially the game does start out with limited continues, but after about 7 hours of playtime, you will unlock free play, which is unlimited continues, so you won't have to worry about that anymore. And that's really the best way to work on the game. So you'll probably do a few failed runs at normal before you unlock free play. And then at that point, you should be able to get through the game if you sit there long enough and learn all the checkpoints. It's kind of a puzzle type of shooter, like R-Type has always been, where, you start off with no power-ups and you kind of got to, figure out all your positioning and how you're going to move through areas and what you're going to clear out when. It's kind of like a shooter puzzle, and that's how R-Type has always been. And that aspect of the game is great. And the stage and enemy layout design is well done, but see, a stage like this is the best stage pretty much in the game, and this is it takes a while to get to a stage that's of this quality, because you can see the detail that was put into the environment while the other stages look a little bit more generic. You see, this stage is really detailed. There's a lot of cool shit going on, and this really feels like a quality stage. But some of the other stages are really not up to that level of quality. You can just tell that they don't quite feel as polished as they could be. There's also the issue that, everything feels a little bit too large and zoomed in at times. And the camera moves in kind of a weird way when you move up and down. The bullets are not a color that stands out either, so, in your peripheral vision, it's very easy to miss bullets and shit that comes out of the background to kill you. It's also not clear when you first get to a new area what stuff can hurt you, what shit can't hurt you. It's not immediately clear like a normal R-Type game would be, because of all the visuals and, the detail they try to put into it. So it does work against the game in some ways. But you will learn through trial and error. I mean, it is a trial and error type of game. But I still don't like the fact that when I'm focusing on my ship, usually in a shooter, you use your peripheral, vision to kind of sort out what's going on the sides of your ship. You don't look directly at the side of the screen, usually. And in this game, if you try to do that, you're going to get killed a lot more than you normally would. At least for me, I did, because bullets don't really show up well in your peripheral vision. They kind of just blend into everything. There's a lot of explosions and shit, too, that kind of bury the bullets. So there's some issues with that. Bosses, again, are really simple like this. I mean, all you do is switch sides and hit the bulb on the other side. I mean, it's pretty damn basic. Other R-Type games had much better bosses overall. Now, this game does have some really cool boss fights, but they're not they're like the exception to the rule for this game. Most of the boss fights are nothing too special. So yeah, there's definitely some issues with the the level design, and not being as good as it could be. But still, overall, there is a lot of great gameplay. There's just some issues that take the game down. And I would say that it's definitely not at the same level as most of the other R-Type games because of that. But even despite all my issues, the game does have a lot of replayability with all the different ships. The other ships, the new ships you unlock can make a huge difference. Some of the later ones seem extremely powerful from what I've seen. And they can make a huge difference. And they'll even make the harder mode, like R-Typer, more manageable, because you'll be able to kill shit a lot faster and more efficiently. So there is an incentive to unlock better ships for the harder difficulties. And of course, the harder difficulties bring with them, possibly more boss forms or, denser arrangements of enemies and things that you have to navigate. So there are some changes with the harder modes. Plus, there's the 6 different stages depending on what paths you take. That's replayability. If you download the DLC, you will get access to yet even more stages that are still being released. They're not all released yet. I didn't bother with that because I was irritated at the fact that the game crashed on me twice in a row. So I just wasn't hugely motivated to put a lot of time into the game after that. But not everyone is going to have that same experience. So I'm rating the game based not so much on that. I'm mainly going to be reviewing the game, based on the core gameplay. Though I do think that's a huge issue if it's something that keeps happening, but I haven't tested it enough to say if it's a consistent issue. But twice in one day was pretty fucking shitty, and it was enough for me to, not want to play the game on the hardest mode for too long. Unless there was some kind of temporary save feature where I could at least save my checkpoint. but that was not incorporated in the game. Maybe it'll be patched in later. That would make me, that would give me an incentive to go back to the game. Then I would work on it if they at least patched in a way to save the game temporarily. Just to save my last checkpoint. That's all I would really want. You can also change your ship speed on the fly with one of the buttons, so that's cool. Unfortunately, I like to use the ship at speed 4 most of the time, and it always defaults at 2, so you always have to, hit the speed button twice to increase to 4 if that's the speed that you like. You have to do that every time you die, which is a little irritating. It would be better if the game just had an option to save the last speed you selected. I think that would be an easy fix. So yeah, that was a hard boss that you saw me just beat there. That's one of the harder ones. But again, there's not much to the bosses as far as different forms or anything that interesting going on. These enemies are more interesting than most of the bosses. And this is an easy fight against these enemies. But they're a lot cooler looking than any of the bosses in the game. Which is kind of a fucking disgrace. I mean, when those are just regular enemies. So the game is kind of a mixed bag. I mean, there's moments that are awesome. I mean, the visuals overall, I would say they're the best visuals that have ever been in a side-scrolling shooter of this style. I don't think any side-scrolling shooter has ever had this budget or, these kind of visuals. Very sharp. No memorable music that I really remember. I can't say any of the tracks were memorable like the older R-Type games, so there's none of that. A lot of the music is kind of generic. This is one of the hardest checkpoints as well. This is very hard even on normal, as you can see. This is on normal. But the game is very much like a shooter puzzle, and of course you have to have a lot of skill at shooters and a lot of patience to work through the game checkpoint to checkpoint. So you have to be used to these type of games where, you kind of slowly work your way and you get better on each death and try to learn, try to fully learn the path you're going to need to get to the next checkpoint, which is a lot of trial and error and good playing, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I do really like this game in a lot of ways. Even though it's kind of generic at points, it can be kind of mixed. But it didn't detract that much from my enjoyment of the game. I mean, I was actually really enjoying it, even with some of the issues I have. I was really fucking getting into it until it started crashing on me. Because I really wanted to explore the game more and do the hardest mode. I wanted to get the DLC and try those stages. Maybe beat those on the hardest mode. I was definitely getting into it. And I paid full price for the game because I was anticipating that I would play it on the hardest mode and really get into it. But as of now, I'm a little bit put off from that. But I may revisit it at a later time, and if they patch it up, that would be even better. So far, I would recommend purchasing this game for about $20 or $30. I don't really recommend getting it for the full $50 because of some of the issues. And I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching.